Nevadaville, Colorado was established in 1859 as Nevada City shortly after the discovery of gold at the confluence of Chicago Creek and Clear Creek in what became Idaho Springs 4 miles to the south. By 1880, the town was now known as Nevadaville, and massive gold strikes on Quartz Hill and in the surrounding area had established the region's new nickname of the richest square mile on Earth. Today, most of Nevadaville has vanished, but a few homes are still in use. The local Masonic Lodge continues to operate in limited capacity. There are some ghost town remnants if you know where to look for them. And on the northeast side of Nevadaville, the ruins of a spectacular mine and shafthouse are visible to hikers who care to make the ascent. Today, we are exploring the ruins of the Prize Mine and Shafthouse. Gold strikes in the Kansas and Burroughs mines on Quartz Hill had swelled the official census population of Nevadaville to almost 1,100 persons in 1880. The town might have grown larger, except that nearby Central City and Blackhawk had also been established and were building mines, houses, and smelters at a much faster rate. Also, Blackhawk had access to a railroad spur, so any ore raised around Nevadaville had to find its way east before anyone got paid. By the early 1900s, the high-value oxidized surface deposits had played out, and the cost of dewatering the mines in the Nevadaville area had crippled the industry. Nevadaville shrank rapidly, and the town was almost entirely abandoned when the Depression arrived in the 1930s. It's an old stove. Meanwhile, the Argo Tunnel had been built from Idaho Springs to Quartz Hill south of Nevadaville, and then across the valley and under Gunnel Hill to the northeast, with its final access to the surface being established at the Grand Army Mine in 1910. Oh yeah, there's a refrigerator up here. Although the Argo revitalized the Nevadaville area mines by permitting efficient ore transport and dewatering, the Argo's electric tram access meant that Nevadaville was no longer necessary. By the mid-1900s, it was a decaying ghost town, with only a handful of hangers-on and the circa 1861 Masonic Lodge still operating. Oh, there we go. And then there's the trestles. Apparently those went partway up the hill to an exit for the La Crosse Tunnel, which was one of the ways the mines up there were emptied. On the west side of the prize, 2 derelict homes and a couple outbuildings are still present. The internal construction of these units is uninsulated wood lath and plaster, along with evidence of old knob and tube style electrical wiring, which dates the original construction to at least pre-World War II, possibly as early as 1900. The condition, however, suggests a relatively recent occupancy. Our best guess is that these were abandoned for good sometime in the 1980s. Although we have not yet turned up any historical references to mining in the prize after the 1950s, the condition of the building today and these houses, in a region prone to heavy winter snow loads, suggests that somebody had reason to maintain them within the past 50 years or so. A water heater and ruins of a modernized bathroom in the second house, along with galvanized steel plumbing, are additional evidence for relatively recent occupancy. Oh, look at this, there's a survey marker. Although mining in the Nevadaville area after World War II never reached the same heights as in the late 1800s, the Chano Mine's operation on Quartz Hill did continue extracting ore from the Glory Hole well into the 1980s, and the company mill on the other side of the mountain operated in parallel, so it's possible that small-scale operations in the Nevadaville area could have sold ore to the Chano Mines until that time. It's possible that in latter years, these homes were used as bunkhouses by a few miners still working off and on in the prize. The most vital part of the prize is a small outbuilding about 1/4 mile east of the Shafthouse that we just saw. The bunker design, steel-plated security door, and distance from the main building suggest this was the mine's explosive storage shed. Smart miners kept their fuse cord, blasting caps, and explosive charges stored well away from their main job. Each shift would report to the storage room, cut fuse cord, and pull just enough explosive to do their work, load it up in wood crates, and then haul it back over to the main building, leaving the rest safely behind. While this small shed might not be much compared to the rest of today's exploration, mines and miners that failed to practice safe explosives handling rarely left behind any ruins worth exploring. Given that almost no equipment was left behind, it's difficult to know how each area of the prize was utilized. At some point, there was probably an air compressor installed under here somewhere for the mine, and possibly a dewatering pump. These larger doors appear to have been used as a vehicle or equipment maintenance workshop. The steel cable here, or rope in miners' parlance, was probably removed from the hoist when the mine was decommissioned, along with the spool sitting outside. The angled section here is the collar for the main shaft, which is now backfilled. We'll see more of that from the inside. Looking at this older photo from perhaps 2010 or even earlier, we can see that a drip roof was formerly installed over the workshop doors, and there was a dump chute for depositing ore in a wagon or truck. But given how facilities like this were remodeled over time by different owners operating at different scales, the original configuration of the building, other than the shaft and the hoist foundation we will see inside, is probably lost to history. The remnants of a makeshift forge, possibly salvaged from an old boiler tank, confirm that the east room we have entered was last used as a blacksmith's workshop. A small, elevated room that overlooks both areas of the building may have been a supervisor's office. None of the modernized wiring remains in the building, so there are few clues as to where any equipment and controls were located. In a most curious reversal of fortune, as this Shafthouse decays today, the view out the main windows toward Central City and Blackhawk reveals a bucolic alpine wonderland. In this mine's early days, the building was new, but the hills outside were mostly stripped bare. In this corner, an isolated communications booth provided sound isolation so that the hoist operator could maintain phone communications with miners working underground. A large concrete foundation, soiled by recent campfires, shows where the hoist machinery was originally installed. The massive head frame which supported the sheave wheel for the hoist, and the reinforced bracing around that frame, are the only reason this section of the shaft house has not yet collapsed under the weight of winter snow loads. Although most have now collapsed and erased the original floor plan, there are still evidences of multiple partition walls within the prize mine's shaft house. The original floor space is more than sufficient for a number of pre-crushing and sorting operations, and there may have been an assaying operation also. From the back side, we can get a sense of the building's original layout. The back part of the building was built into the mountainside where rock had evidently been hewn out. This closet has mostly been taken over by birds and squirrels, but the shelves in central location suggest it would have been ideal for storing assaying tools or chemicals. The Colorado Bureau of Mines has remediated this shaft up to ground level. As recently as 10 to 15 years ago, this shaft collar would have been an open void dropping 1,300 feet to the remains of the Argo tunnel, followed by an additional 200 feet of descent into one of the richest gold-bearing ore bodies ever discovered in this region. Today, this shaft house shell is all that remains above a gold deposit that may still be one of the richest ore bodies in the state of Colorado. But with depth, flooding, and environmental regulations all in play, that wealth may never be recovered. And so, the prize decays. In the very near future, nothing may be left of this 150-year-old structure. Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us again for that presentation of HMGM, How to Model a Gold Mill in 27,000 Easy Steps. The prize mine is a fairly new one to me. It's actually not that far away from where I live, but it's kind of back up in the hills a little bit, and this is entirely new to me just a couple years ago. There doesn't seem to be a lot of information about it on the internet either, and perhaps that's just for the best, because as you could see, there's not a lot of graffiti vandalism on it. There is some though, however, ever since about 2020, when the COVID shutdowns occurred, it appears. But I'm hoping if nothing else I can preserve what I've seen, because this thing is falling apart rapidly at this point. This mine is in fact at about 9,000 feet. They get heavy snow loads up there. These walls are starting to pop away from the base, sheet metal's falling off rapidly, and once it starts to get exposed like that, then the weathering occurs really fast. I found conflicting information on the internet about exactly when it operated. One source here that you can find, Western Mining History, claims it was active from 1911 to 1939, but that doesn't feel quite right unless they mean just this Shafthouse. There are records elsewhere of legal disputes in the prize lode, the actual area below ground that they were mining out, going clear back to the 1870s. In any case, Western Mining History is actually claiming that the primary metals pulled out of the prize were lead, zinc, and copper, with gold and silver only being secondary. And in some respects, that's perhaps not surprising, particularly with lead and silver, because usually if you find lead, then you find small amounts of silver in it. The mineral galena is really common in Colorado's mineral belt. And then gold, of course, usually you don't find that in massive quantities, but there was more than enough to be worth millions and millions that came out of this mine. And there's probably still that much back in the ground. What happened was, at some point in the 1870s, let's say, the prize started to be mined. And then around 1939, things took a downturn as the United States started to move into World War II. And what really killed the prize and all the other mines in this area is that they were using the Argo tunnel in order to be able to go to depths of 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 feet down below. The Argo happened to be about 1,300 feet down below the prize. When the Argo had its tragic accident in January of '43 and then was closed forever, then there was no longer a way to efficiently dewater the mines in the area, and it was extremely expensive to pump that up over 1,000 feet. So anything down in the lower levels is probably still there today. No one had a chance to touch it any further. We do know there was activity in there later though. The Weekly Register Call claims to be Colorado's oldest operating newspaper. It's in Blackhawk. And I found one article on their website that summarizes some past things. There's one here about a legal dispute in 1879 that is kind of interesting. And this one here is fun. October 3rd, 1952. Don Russell had a terrifying experience on Monday last in the shaft of the prize mine in Nevada District, which is owned by him. He was lowered to the 800-foot level by bucket, and after spending an hour taking samples in the drift, i.e. a tunnel leading off the main shaft, rang the bell for the engineer on top to lower the bucket. When the friction on the electric hoist was released, the bucket descended to the level, but when the power was applied to the hoist to bring the bucket to the surface, the friction clutch refused to mesh with the drum and Don was left stranded. He started up the way, that would be the manway, a series of ladders to get out of the mine. He started up the way to climb to the top, and after going a couple hundred feet, so let's say he was around the 600-foot level, one ladder fell out from under him, and the one directly above was already out, which left him stranded in between, unable to go up or down. In the meantime, Gene Lambard, the engineer, unable to fix the hoist, went to town for help. So he had to go to either Blackhawk or Central City, it doesn't say which, and get a rope and a repeller, and then come back, and they had to pull the guy out. And in the end, it turns out he found there was one loose bolt in the mechanism that was jamming it. So, guy was operating a mine. He was down 800 feet below the earth, relying on a hoist that wasn't being maintained properly and ladders that weren't being maintained properly. They did things a bit differently back then. The only injury to Don was his feelings and apprehension, and he does not want to repeat the incident. Wouldn't think so. But in any case, that's another little piece of interesting Colorado mining history that I've been through. It connects with the Argo Tunnel, which we've done a big feature on previously. Check that out if you haven't already. And if you do any abandoned exploring, remember, even in a place like this where the main shaft has been filled up and you can't fall down a 1,300-foot hole to nowhere, Nonetheless, there are many hazards: loose boards, nails, rusty things, stuff that could collapse on you, random pieces of rock hanging precariously off roofs. You saw some of that in the video. So stay safe. If you're not prepared to take responsibility for those possible hazards and wear appropriate clothing, stay out. Just enjoy it this way. Otherwise, take care, and I'll see you again next time, whenever that is.
Has anyone seen my phone?